This has to be one of Genshin's weirdest Archon quests, but also one of its best, even top 1 if you base it heavily off the huge amounts of lore and character moments we got towards the end of it. The theater story that's basically the version of Genshin Renova Among Us is the one where there'd be the most pushback in terms of writing and pacing, but it transitioned pretty darn well into Renova's reveal towards the end, and that entire reveal avalanched into one of the most memorable endings to an act I've ever seen in Genshin, especially with the Traveler at their very best.
Who says there'll be a next time?
This line was up there with one of my favorites. For sure, this is the Cryo Traveler because that line was cold. So let's go over Act 2 of Snezhnaya's Archon Quest, starting off with the theater portion. Picking up right after Act 1, we head to Korolevsky Theater to watch Odette's rehearsal to try and figure out more info about whether she's Lelek or not. The performance is well done, but there's a big blizzard happening outside that's preventing anyone from leaving and entering, with people seemingly disappearing if they try to head out. This blizzard is so bad and rare that it's even preventing personal Fatui armies from coming back to escort Mitya, who is a top scientist. So everyone stays overnight, and soon this turns into a whole mystery murder where every night 2 people suddenly die with no evidence, and the cast is all trying to figure out who the real killer is. This is pretty much Genshin's version of One Night Werewolf or Among Us. Eventually, through some hypotheses about the dead and lingering souls due to leyline disorders in the theater, the dwindling cast eventually figure out that the deaths are due to the leylines attempting to retrieve the lost souls from previous eras, ranging from Shram, a human lover, to a fae, and Petashka, who is mistaken for child sister Tonya, and who was sick with frostbite, which is now a curable disease. Eventually, we realize that everyone was already dead from the start, and that the imposter among us turns out to be the ruler of death, Renova. Everyone in the theater was placed under her curse of death due to her needing to resolve the theater's leylines and preventing Mitya from discovering a breakthrough in Snezhnayan research. The Traveler and Mitya defeat Renova's manifestation of Alyosha, and everyone wakes up in the theater with some bit of amnesia. Overall, I think the murder mystery transitioned pretty well into a ruse by Renova, but at the cost of making the characters look a little bit silly and not thinking completely logically. Take for example Odette, who turns out to be Lelek. She only gets confronted about this because Chugunov blatantly accuses Lelek of being the cause of all this, and everyone just goes along with it, even though there's no hard evidence. The Rockout members confront Odette about this, and Odette simply says, "Yeah, I'm Lelek." And now, while I appreciate that the characters are not beating around the bush, I felt that the ending of Act 1 put a strong emphasis on needing to discover Odette's relationship with Lelek, but the resolution didn't really meet the expectations set up by Act 1, and we don't really see the full consequences of Odette being Lelek because the mystery of Lelek was overshadowed by the mystery of the murders. Another example is the snowstorm. These characters have been stuck in the theater for days, with people dying left and right. Yet, no one really made note of how weird the situation is, because it should have been noted that something environmental has to be related to the weird situation. You mean to tell me that an extremely important scientist like Mitya, who was supposed to receive a private army escort personnel, made no qualms about how strange that the army isn't here? Even though Valeri has been so adamant about escorting him back? Surely a snowstorm shouldn't stop the Fatui from retrieving arguably their most precious scientist.
I think this could be a supernatural event.
Oh
It
my
isn't
god.
characteristic of human-on-human homicide at
Finally
all.
someone says it. Oh my god, bro. Finally someone says it, because there is a literal snowstorm that's happening outside where you're supposed to have Fatui armies come and rescue Mitya to bring back to the experiment lab, and yet that hasn't happened, even though he's a highly valued member of the experimental club. And it's like, dude, surely someone's gotta think, wait, this snowstorm is just sus on its own. Like, it has to be environmental. Someone says it. Oh boy. It felt like the writing made the characters focus so much on making a murder mystery at the expense of the characters' logical behaviors. That's not to say that there weren't any good character moments. I actually quite liked the story of the NPCs, like how the stubborn and egotistical Chugunov began to see the errors of his company ways because of how much Patashka reminded him of his daughter. Or how Shram's story showed that humans and Fays could love each other despite discrimination and social stigma against it. Even Vodyanitsa, who opened up more about how the regime of Fays were cast out by the Tsaritsa, and that the Tsaritsa took it upon herself to become the common enemy that would unite Fays and humans. These were lovely character stories, but they felt a little bit out of place for a murder mystery, and it felt like this quest would have fit more wonderfully into a story or world quest overall. But that said, oh my gosh, once we were nearing the end and slowly building towards the Grim Reaper, I was locked in. Renova's reveal set like this amazing tone for the rest of the quest, and I loved how she was portrayed by showing that she found amusement in humans giving meanings to death, and also her interactions with Mitya, where even though she does see herself above humans, she does understand that even gods and humans share some level of empathy, such as how they view jobs and work overall, where it's something that you just gotta do even if you don't want to do it. Both Traveler's use of the elements as well as finally using an upgraded sword that's not prototype Broncore was really nice to see, and Mitya's combat capabilities for a scientist surprised me as well. Ronova makes it known that there's a level of risk associated with Descenders, which is why she's hesitant to interact with the Traveler in general, because who knows what kinds of consequences could happen from this. So the Traveler and Mitya are able to escape from the dream because they defeat the Alyosha version of Ronova, and everyone wakes up as a result, albeit with a little amnesia. And just when I thought the quest was slowly wrapping up, we find out that Child's personal security for Paimon failed at their job. Paimon's missing! But not because they weren't capable, it's that how do you even do your job when it's Pierro the one who comes and takes Paimon away with no kind of violence as well? So, the Traveler and Odette bolt over to the armory lab, breaking it and going through yet another round of the Curse of Death, because as we find out, Ronova is present once again to stop Mitya and the researchers from making their forbidden breakthroughs. It seems like there's a way for the Heavenly Principles and the Shades to detect if humankind is going to be making some kind of breakthrough that they don't allow. It's a big sense of urgency because we're also worrying about Paimon as well, so I thought that added well to the gameplay atmosphere. And the cutscene that follows is by far one of my favorites. Just as the Traveler is about to reunite with Paimon, Ronova appears again. Ronova claims Paimon as a creation of Celestia, but a useless one that she wants to take back. And as she's about to, the director of the Harbingers, the Jester, Pierro, denies Ronova taking Paimon and coldly demands what she's doing here. Everything about this scene is awesome. Both Traveler and Pierro show their care for Paimon in different ways, where Pierro gets ticked off when Ronova calls out his obsession with Paimon, whereas the Traveler shows us his anger towards Ronova in response to her calling Paimon useless. So I love how the Traveler is the one on the offensive, unable to contain his rage and emotions, whereas Pierro is the one calmly there defending Paimon from the effects of the fight between the Traveler and Ronova. So it perfectly showcases the Traveler's unfiltered emotions, whereas Pierro knows that the time is not now to defeat Ronova. I'm really curious about the limits of Renova's powers because while she has full authority over death, she can't just simply kill whenever she pleases, which means that, like how Capitano found a loophole in Natlan, it foreshadows that Ronova will be defeated by using the rules forced upon her, which will be a great demonstration of showing how even gods as powerful as the Shades are still shackled by the rules of the world they rule over. I was a little surprised that Pierro willingly told us so much lore and explained everything about Project Stuzha and Miss Tilton, but given his care for Paimon and the fact that he understands he needs the Traveler as an ally, it makes sense to me. I only wonder about the antagonists of the story going forward because I'm pretty sure that I just don't see how the Fatui Harbingers will pose any kind of significant conflict to the Traveler in the future. In fact, this might be the last time that the Fatui propose any kind of conflict to them. So we just might be seeing Celestia level, Khaenri'ah level, Abyss related antagonists in the future. Pierro's lore drops were great to end on it as well, So Project Stuzha's purpose is to gather enough energy to fund the weapon for Ms. Tilton, which will be used to break through into Celestia. The combination of the Gnosis and stellar linchpins can serve as anti-Celestia energy. I am curious on how stellar linchpins work ever since we found it out from Snezhnaya last update, as well as waiting on when the Tsaritsa finally gets all 7 Gnosis, because that'll be the time when, I guess, Project Miss Tilton may finally be complete. So, also, shout out to Zhongli's contract with her in advance, because I'm sure that's going to be a pretty solid plot point coming up soon. I also like how he tells us that the Tsaritsa is still on an expedition, so she can't see us right now, even though she would be happy to. And then right afterwards, she comes back home. And the timing is funny, but maybe suspicious too? Pierro really believes in the Tsaritsa's fight for freedom from the curses and rules of this world, and while I love his undeniable conviction to see a free civilization, I do wonder if a successful Tsaritsa rebellion would simply just be replacing the ruler of Teyvat with another. Paimon finally gets some lore, so apparently Pierro pulled Paimon from Celestia somehow, and the Venser King didn't really care about this, so Paimon just lived as she is now in Khaenri'ah, going through the Cataclysm as well, where her memory loss is likely the result of a curse from the Cataclysm. I think it's super cool how Pierro ends on the note that because Paimon's state was likely the best out of anyone post-Cataclysm, that makes her worth protecting. So we'll likely explore more about Paimon and her relationship with Khaenri'ah, most likely when we get to Khaenri'ah ourselves. And that pretty much wraps up the Archon Quest. Project Stuzha was surprisingly suspended, since I thought they'd focus more on it and the conflict with the people overall, but for now it appears that the people of Snezhnaya will finally see a clear improvement in everyday life, especially now that the Tsaritsa is back from her campaign. I do think there's more to her than what is stated by her followers, so we'll be looking forward to her story and role in the next few acts. Overall, I'd say the murder mystery part of the act was kinda weird, but I give props to the writers for trying something new, and I hope they learn a lot from the reception to the story. And of course, the last part of the act was one of the most fun train rides of a Genshin story I've played, and oh boy, do I hope to continue seeing more of Snezhnaya as they slowly increment their way towards the rebellion against the divine. So with that said, thank you very much for watching this video.